Hey y'all, welcome to another episode of Soccer for Us. I'm Bart, and I am joined with me today by two guys who have a lot to say about the 26 players who have been chosen by Gregg Berhalter to represent the United States at this 2022 FIFA World Cup. We've had weeks of leaks and rumors and speculations, but the 26 players have been finalized. It was released officially today. To talk with me, I have Caleb Cook and Thomas. You may know him as US Keeper on Twitter. Caleb, how's it going, man?
It's going. I'm here. Mixed emotions, a lot to be excited about, and a lot to debate, and that's why we're here.
That is why we're here. And to help us with that, we got Thomas, who's joining the podcast again, who I'm sure has plenty to say about the fact that we have 4 right backs on this roster.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. Yeah, there's it's exciting times. We got about 12 days, so before US kicks off. So,
well, let's just kind of jump right into it because we can talk about our big feelings after we've talked about the 26 guys who are on the roster. So, right off from the jump, let's talk the goalkeepers. Ethan Horvath from Luton Town, Sean Johnson from New York City FC, and Matt Turner from Arsenal. Now, there's an obvious big snub on this list. And instead of kind of going snubs all together, let's talk about the snub in this particular position group because there's no Zach Steffen. He was seemingly Gregg Berhalter's first choice goalkeeper throughout all of qualifying. Seemed to be even the first choice up until 2 months ago when he obviously wasn't in camp for injury-ish reasons, but maybe there's more to it. I don't know. Thomas, what do you think? I mean, you're the goalkeeper. What about this decision speaks to you?
I mean, if you watch Steffen's form over the last several months, it's been inconsistent. And I think Gregg wanted some consistency. There had been some talk about 6 months ago that the injury he sustained, maybe a year ago or so, was still hampering him, impacting, his ability to make certain plays on the field. So I think that probably came into play with it. I mean, Horvath's been playing pretty consistently. Turner hasn't played a lot, but he had a few Europa games before he got his most recent injury, which it sounds like he's back in form. So I just think it was based on that overall consistent form from match to match, even though he was playing.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and Gregg Berhalter said it in his comments, that he is pretty much leaning toward Matt Turner as being the number one. It seems like maybe that decision has been in his mind for a lot longer than just maybe the last week. But it still feels weird that Steffen, who we've kind of talked about being a Berhalter guy. Berhalter's talked about him being a leader in the locker room. A guy who, again, he started 8 of the 14 matches in qualifying, which is more than Turner did. It just does feel weird that he wasn't included over Horvath or Johnson, who, I don't think that they're bad, but it feels like such a sudden decision.
Yeah, I don't know if there was some speculation there. Might have, and again, mine it's on the Twitter world, so you could take that for what it is. But there was some speculation about maybe some locker room challenges, but that because if he wasn't going to be the starter, then maybe Gregg, who definitely looks at the locker room chemistry as something of importance, as we'll talk about later with Rodon's addition to the roster. I think that's maybe consideration as well, within the group there. It's really, who knows with Gregg. I mean, there's definitely a few surprises here, for sure. And but I think form comes down to it. I just don't think he was, playing all that well. I don't think he looked, consistent out there. And I just don't think, you were going to bring a guy in, that wasn't playing well currently. And when you have the, some decent depth in Turner and Horvath and even Johnson as well. So,
Caleb, how do you feel confidence-wise about the 3 that he selected?
I mean, barring injury, Matt Turner's starting every single game.
Do we agree with that? Do we all agree? Like Turner's the number one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully there's more than 3 matches, 3 guaranteed, but I do think we can get out of the group. I think it's a very realistic possibility, and I think that's the goal. That's the expectation. So I think Matt Turner, like I said, unless he's injured, he's starting every one of them. I love Horvath. I've always been a big fan of Horvath. To come in cold, step in to the was it the Nation League's final when he saves the penalty uh, against Mexico. That's massive. It's massive. I have no issues with him. And then Sean Johnson, we've talked about it, you and I. Um, I think it's more of like a hat tip to him and his contributions. The third keeper's probably never going to play. Um, but you bring him and say thank you for everything you've done. And, Slonina is super, super young. He's fine. He'll be at the next one, no problem. With Stefan, I think I think Thomas alluded to it, and I kind of think that's got to be what it is because form. We've seen Greg call Stefan in and start him during dips in form. I think that kind of the same thing along the lines with Brooks. I think there was a conversation of we're going to go with Matt, and Stefan didn't like it. I think that's a very realistic possibility. I'm not going to sit here and confirm that. We don't know. It's all speculation, but uh, it seems like there was more than just uh, what happens on the field involved in this decision.
Yeah, I think when you look at the keeper position, because obviously there's only one guy on the field at a time, and to be quite honest, you're not starting a guy in one game and to start a guy for the next game. You don't want to have to do that in the World Cup. You want to know who your number one is so that you can play him. And there's a lot of reasons why you need to have an established number one, backline communication, leadership on the field, all these things. And it's also possible too, and I think this is something that's become a little bit more evident through U.S. Soccer's communication, is maybe Matt Turner has become a good leader in that locker room because, again, that was something that Stefan kind of filled a void of when you had all these young and experienced guys. Maybe Turner's finally gotten to his own. I mean, Thomas, what do you think from Turner on the field? Do you think he's able to command the respect and give us the leadership back there that we need from a starting goalkeeper?
Yeah, I think Turner's has done a great job. I will he came in early in the qualifying. He started off. I don't know if Stefan was injured. I think he must have been injured when they first started off in the September camp, and I thought he did great. I found it odd. I think it was against. What was it against? It was against Panama, and they lost 1-0 in Panama, and he pulled them, and he started Stefan the next game. And I didn't particularly think that Turner did anything, to lose that opportunity. But he did, and then he proceeded to go with Stefan, in the next 3 matches. So when you do that without kind of in Gregg's way, not really communicating, any real true reasoning why we're going to have that change when there really wasn't a form issue. I think. I think that's kind of telling to how Gregg does things. But Turner, I think Turner did great. We saw him in the Gold Cup the year before. I think he worked with that group very well, and he's worked really hard with the Revolution and now with Arsenal. I think he's putting a ton of time into to make sure he's ready for these critical World Cup games.
Well, my final take on just goalkeepers is that I think at the end of the day, you want to have the guy who is most likely to save shots in between the pipes. And I think that Matt Turner is that dude out of all 4 of the goalkeepers we've talked about. Let's move on to defenders. We have 9 defenders. Cameron Carter-Vickers from Celtic, Aaron Long from New York Red Bulls, Tim Ream from Fulham, and Walker Zimmerman from Nashville SC. Those make up our center backs. I don't know if there's anything I don't know if there's a surprise here. I don't know if there's a snub. I think the surprise is that Tim Ream is back, but given that Richards is hurt, given that, it seems very clear that McKenzie and Eric Palmer-Brown weren't quite at the level that Gregg wanted. Is it that big of a surprise that Tim Ream is included?
I don't think it's a surprise. I mean, you see what he's doing in the Premier League week in, week out. He's playing really, really well. Um, I think a lot of the poor performances we saw from him with the U.S., he was put in positions to fail. Um, Especially when you see him as a left back. Why are we doing
Yeah.
that? Um, and then when you play a high line and a back three, and he's the left sided center back, and he's getting cooked by world class player, like that's not his game. But that's also not necessarily his fault. That it was a tactical decision, and he was put in positions to fail. You see him play for his club week in and week out in the Premier League, arguably the most competitive league in the world, um, and he does just fine. So the fact that he's playing well, uh, I think he's rewarded with the call up. I don't think he gets in if Richards was healthy,
Yeah.
which is a shame, but it is what it is. So the fact that he's in, I'm really excited about it. I don't know if he's going to play because we all know who the two starting center backs are going to be.
Yeah, I mean, Thomas, that's the question, right? Like, it's very clear that Ream was the next guy on the depth chart once it was confirmed that Richards wasn't going to come, which sucks. But is it Long and Zimmerman now?
I'll pull a Greg. I say, let's see how they do in camp. I mean, I would have no problem with Zimmerman, Ream, honestly. I mean, Ream has shocked me. I haven't been a huge fan of his. He's been inconsistent in the, Fulham's, back and forth from Premier League to Championship. But this season he has impressed. It's undeniable. And I think people have a memory of Ream's poor performance back in 2019 when he was put in a left back position. That's not a strength of his. He's that's not his position. He was playing out of position for many matches, and he got exposed, and rightfully so. He's just left footed, so they thought that any guy can play left footed back for the U.S. there. So I think that's in a lot of people's memories. I think pairing with Zimmerman is not bad, but I think we'll have to see. I mean, Long has not impressed. I mean, the problem is our depth at the position is just it's not great right now. We've got two key players that probably would have been on the team in Robinson and Richards. So
exactly, two of your top three center backs are injured. Like absolutely, Miles Robinson, Chris Richards are two of your top three, if not numbers 1 and 2, right? And we saw that throughout qualifying. It was Miles, it was Chris, and it was Walker as your three that he rotated the most. And honestly, that was an okay rotation because it was like they all three had similar qualities and did similar things well, but they also had some things that did better than the other two. So it was a really good rotation. The fact that neither Richards nor Robinson are going to the World Cup sucks. Like as an Atlanta fan, it sucks. As a fan of young Americans who have chances to make names for themselves in Europe, that sucks because it very much is likely that both Richards and Robinson could have used good performances in this tournament to catapult their careers. And the fact that they're not here, it really does suck. It's going to be concerning to see who, because I'm not even going to say that Cameron Carter-Vickers is like the definite, like, yeah, okay, I'll be happy if he's next to Zimmerman. I'll be less anxious opposed to Long. But is CCV really that good of a guy? I mean, that's the question I have. I mean, what do you think, Caleb?
Everybody's talking about his performances in the Scottish Premier League or Premiership. I mean, yeah, he's doing really well, but what attacking talent is he going up against week in and week out?
Yeah.
When he plays Rangers, okay. But other than that, is it like how MLS gets dumped on, right, for talent wise, but what does MLS spend money on? Attacking talent. So if you're playing defense in MLS, you're at least playing the best part of MLS. Is the attacking talent in Scotland really that much higher than it would be in MLS? Now, I think the biggest difference would be style of play, intensity, speed. But there's some extremely gifted technical attacking talent in MLS. And I really don't know if there's that much of a difference to say that, oh, Cameron Carter-Vickers is just week in and week out playing against much better competition to where you can just definitively say that he should be starting over Long. I don't know. Like I said, for me, it should be Ream and Zimmerman. But it is what it is. We're in this conversation. We're having this conversation because of two completely unfortunate injuries.
Yeah.
To, like you alluded to what I think would be the number one and number two center back.
And
in
I
Rollins
just
and
looked at
Chris.
the starting lineups. Ream has only played with Zimmerman once, I think, and Zimmerman was a sub in
Because they're
that
the same
match.
person. Duh. I mean,
Right. Yeah, but it's funny because he actually has more pairings with Long in matches for the United
that
States.
actually doesn't surprise me because I feel like Long and Ream are very good pairs as opposed to, I mean, Walker Zimmerman is similar to Aaron Long, but I guess Zimmerman hasn't really been around the same time period that Ream was playing. So that does make sense that Ream and Long would be together. But, I think the question now is it Walker Zimmerman and someone else, Thomas? I mean, is that really who you kind of see it?
I mean, I don't know. I'm now that I looked at that stat, I don't know. I mean, I think camp is going to be kind of telling, but I think Greg's going to go with the pairings that have been playing. I mean,
Yeah.
you could make a change. That's the thing. You can make a change. And I had thought while it was being rumored there might be a fifth center back. They might actually utilize a three-man back, but I don't think there's any.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll get to it, but with especially 4 right backs, I don't think anything really is,
Well,
center back quality. So.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it, 4 right backs, and we'll talk about one that maybe could have allowed you to play a three back system. But you have 4 right backs and a left back. You have Serginho Dest now with AC Milan. You have Shaq Moore from Nashville SC. You have Joe Scally from Borussia Mönchengladbach, and the left back Jedi Robinson from Fulham. Jedi, the obvious choice at number 1 left back. I think Dest, the obvious choice at number 1 right back. I think once we kind of saw Vines not perform well in that September camp, it made it very clear that Scally was going to make the roster. Do you agree with that, Thomas?
Yeah, I thought that really opened his door. He still might have made it, in my opinion. I think
Probably.
Yeah, if taking 5, I think he still makes it. I mean, he's playing every week at a very high level. I mean, it's kind of hard to argue. He didn't get a great look and opportunity, early, late, kind of in the cycle. So I think.
Yeah.
I think he's a no-brainer, honestly. I think he's been playing quality soccer. It's hard to leave him off.
But then the shock, Caleb, is I think Shaq Moore. And I forgot to mention DeAndre Yedlin. I'm sorry. Shaq Moore getting called up, I think, over Reggie Cannon. I think that was the final decision. It was over Reggie Cannon, who we've seen Cannon gives you some tactical flexibility as a right center back / just pure center back. Shaq Moore, though, does have a history of being able to play left back. Obviously, Joe Scally plays left back on occasion. He's done that more frequently for Gladbach. And then Serginho Dest has the ability to play left back as well. So does it bother you that there's no true left back? Or do you think that, yes, we brought 4 right backs, but 3 of the 4 can play on the left side? Is that okay?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is what it is based on the player pool that we have. There's no
Shockingly,
one
we don't have a lot
screaming.
of American left backs. I know this surprises every single person who's ever watched the USMNT.
Listen, I've got a 10-year-old son. I'm telling you, he's on his way. He's on his way. He says, "Sweet little lefty," and I'm working him that way. But we don't have anyone in the player pool right now that's just screaming, "I'm the backup left back to Anthony Robinson." We all know A-Rob's the number 1 guy. You can play Dest on the left. You can play Scally on the left. You can play Shaq Moore on the left. I think if A-Rob gets hurt, it's probably going to be Dest on the left with Scally on the right, or vice versa. You could see either one of those. I would say Shaq Moore's probably on the depth chart over Yedlin. I think Yedlin made the roster for leadership. We know how important eyes and vibes are to our fearless leader. Shaq Moore was extremely, extremely shocking to me. I'm a fan. He's from my hometown. I have played with many players that grew up playing with him. Haven't played with or against him. Don't know how that's happened, but really, really excited for the guy. But it was out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And when you look at Shaq and Yedlin, to me, as far as roster construction, they are the same profile. That's why I look at Yedlin as like not a right back. I look at Yedlin as just a player on the roster. He was simply brought because of his leadership.
Is that a problem, do you think, Thomas, or do you think it's okay to use slots 24, 25, 26 on a guy who like clearly brings leadership to the team?
Yeah, I'm not for that. I think you got to bring. I think you got to bring your best team. And obviously, if you've got a nuclear type player on your team
Right.
that's blowing things up, I mean that's a different conversation.
Well, but then
But
that's the follow up, right? Is Yedlin? Is there anyone better? Like, what right back is like definitively better than DeAndre Yedlin right now?
see, I'm not a fan of Nate Yedlin. Never have been. I mean,
Sure.
he's so inconsistent. I think honestly, I think he actually has some composure issues when he's on the field and things aren't going his way. So yeah, I think that there is that leadership element. Veteran has been there, done there. Because honestly, there was only him and Brooks would have been the only two players that could have probably in this group that would have even been considered from the last group in 2014. So
I'm just not ready to like. I don't think I could definitively, with like my whole chest, be like, yes, Reggie Cannon is better than DeAndre Yedlin and gives us a better option off the bench than Yedlin. But I could be convinced. But I don't think that there's like that big of a difference between anyone after Joe Scally at right back. And really, Joe Scally gets that nod because of the level he plays at and then his left back playing ability. So I'm not going to like, of all the like guys who are a little bit older, been there, done that, Yedlin's the one I think I have the least problem with. There's a dude in the midfield that we'll talk about in a second that I'm just, again, astounded that he continues to get looks for the U.S. men's national team. Any other takes on this fullback group, though?
The only other thing I would say is, and I was thinking about it when I had seen something this morning about Shaq Moore being rumored on the roster. I'm thinking to myself, the only, if you look at this roster, you're seeing four sets of players that are playing in the same club together. It's not hugely impactful, but you're looking at, Moore and Zimmerman. You're looking at, Aronson and Adams, as kind of players that are on the same field, Ream and Robinson. There's some, continuity there that I think was maybe part of the consideration when you're doing that. And plus they're playing, those European, English teams and players. And Gregg even said it, like when he was talking about, that experience, with, different players playing those European clubs. And so I think that was maybe part of the decision making, a little bit along the way. Like I have no issue with Shaq Moore. I think he's a reasonable call up. He's done well. He just, his stamina is always something I question. He usually can't get through much more than 70 minutes of a match before needing to be subbed. But
that's fair. That's fair. Let's move on to the midfield, though, because I think this is where things get a little bit more exciting and less stressful. 7 midfielders: Brendan Aronson from Leeds, Kellen Acosta from LAFC, Tyler Adams from Leeds, Luca De La Torre. Apparently, according to Gregg, he'll be fine from an injury perspective, who plays at Celta Vigo, Weston McKennie from Juventus, Yunus Musa from Valencia, Christian Roldan from Seattle. I'm going to start out from the top. I am very upset that Christian Roldan gets to go to a World Cup when the dude has done fuck all to earn it at the national team level. And I'm sorry, he hasn't. So now that that's out of the way, Caleb, who about this midfield core surprises you that they're included, or maybe is the most exciting that they're included? I mean, there's some midfield talent here. Which one has you the most like, woo?
I think the fact that Brendan Aronson is listed as a midfielder instead of a winger is telling as far as the way Berhalter's looking at things. So that's exciting. I am probably one of the biggest Musa fans in the world. Can't wait to watch that kid. Tyler Adams is probably coming into this roster in the best form of any other player.
Yeah.
McKennie, he's kind of been a roller coaster, some injuries, some form dips, but he has always shown the ability to show up in big games, big matches, and big moments. So really, a lot to be excited about. And then as far as surprises, I wish I could say that I'm surprised that Roldan's on this roster, but I'm not. I'm not at all. Berhalter loves the guy. We've talked about this a lot. When he plays for Seattle, he does some really incredible things. He plays really, really well. Unfortunately, that is not the person that we see when he puts on a U.S. kit. I don't know why. There's no science that can
Because he
back
hits
it
the
up. Who
ceiling.
knows?
That's like the exact reason. I'm sorry. Like
I
his
get. I
ceiling
mean,
is MLS.
I don't understand it. I do. I will say this: he will work his butt off. So I wouldn't mind if you're trying to close out a lead and you put him
No,
on with 15
no,
minutes
no,
left.
no.
But no, I'm just trying to make sense of the fact that he's there. And if he's gonna be there,
That's fair.
then that's the role that I'm okay using him for. Not, hey, we need a goal. Let's go put Roldan on. What?
Yeah.
You're talking about the guy who has 2 goal contributions, and I say 2 assists, no goals in 32 caps.
Thomas has the stats in front of him. I'm sure he's looking it up. But
Thomas, you have the
Roldan, yeah,
stats?
Roldan has like it just comes back to that. He gets chance after chance and never really does anything to actually make the team around him better at the national
And
team
my
level.
thing is, if he was a defensive midfielder, okay, with those stats, whatever. He is an attacking midfielder / winger role when he plays for the U.S., and those are the numbers that he
Yeah.
has. That's not good enough. So again, you want to talk about players that are being brought for their role in the locker room, okay, but it's a closed tournament, and once the tournament starts, there are no changes being made. You need every single roster spot available. And when we talk about this midfield roster, you can't. The fact that Tillman's not brought when he has shown the ability to make magic happen on the field, and then he just literally scores a game winner minutes before the roster's dropped. Like, he's already done more for the attack for the U.S. in what, 3 caps? Like, those types of decisions just, they're mind-boggling.
I have no reason to explain Christian Roldan. Thomas, maybe talk about someone who actually makes sense. I mean, Brendan Aronson as a midfielder, is that, do you think that's a tell from Berhalter, or do you think that's just more of a nominal, okay, we're listing him as a midfielder type thing?
I mean, he's capable of playing both. I mean, we've seen what he's been doing at the Premier League. He's got a ton of energy. He starts, matches off, very well. Has a lot of, it's a different style. I mean, I have to wonder if you'd start Aronson over, Musa, who I love, but I mean, it depends on what matchups you're going to see. I mean, again, Gregg is obsessed with the connection of these players playing against, a lot of the same English players and Welsh players that we're going to be matching up against, in the group. So I think that I think he's considering that as well, and to see what that matchup's going to look like. I mean, I think you could, start Aronson and then bring Musa off, the bench, in the 60th minute, because Aronson usually gassed, for Leeds, because he runs so much, he's all over the field. He's very energetic. So that, I mean, because that's goals are going to be the area that we need, and that's why I don't understand the Tillman not bringing Tillman, because you could bring him off the bench. He can get for a corner. That guy has had some crazy having goals this season off corners. I mean, he can elevate. He's impressive. So the Roldan thing, that makes no sense to me. I just, he's not even, he doesn't play an 8. He doesn't play a 6. So he doesn't, that's not where his so-called strong suit is for this team. So, I mean, in my opinion, you could have brought in Johnny Cardoso over Roldan, for the defensive purposes, in my opinion, but he's been playing quite very well. So
I think that's the question, right? I always think about, like, okay, if you're going to say this guy's a snub, you have to list guys who definitely should make it above them, right? I think you just mentioned Johnny Cardoso. We can mention Malik Tillman. I mean, I'll throw Georgi Mihailovic out there because I know Caleb and I like to talk about him. But, like, there are other guys who just clearly have more talent and are playing better right now than Christian Roldan, and yet he continues to get looks. But I don't want to harp too much more on Christian Roldan. Let's talk about the positives of this midfield. Is that I think we do have some decent depth at all 3 positions, if you want to look at it that way, but definitely depth at the 8. And I'm okay with, I think Kellen Acosta is a fine backup at the 6. I don't think you really have any other options. But let's talk about those attacking midfielders, because now that Aronson is kind of listed as a midfielder, right? you have McKinney, Aronson, Musa, De La Torre as 4 guys who I feel pretty confident in going into a World Cup. Thomas, is that a confidence level I should be having, or am I a little off base with that?
I mean, I like the group. I mean, we've seen them play, together. We've seen them play, as subs come in. I mean, I think it's a quality group. I'm just hoping De La Torre is, healthy. I think that's my biggest concern with that. It's just what his health is. He hasn't played, and he wasn't obviously starting a lot for his club. So I think that's my only concern with the group, because he's been out for what, 2 weeks.
He's been out for a couple weeks.
Yeah. So I just wonder how his form is going to be in conditioning. So I mean, he's not going to start. He'll be, he'd come off, but he's great with the ball. So
yeah. I mean, that's fair. We've got a lot of guys kind of coming in with injuries that Gregg assures that they'll be ready to go. But Caleb, how confident do you feel in the attacking midfielders that we've brought, other than the one guy?
I mean, there's so much to be excited about. I think possibly the strongest core, arguably the forwards, but with Adams, McKinney, Musa, and Aronson, especially now with Aronson being listed as a midfielder, and then when De La Torre is healthy, he's shown that he can absolutely do the job. I think it's very exciting. And with Kellen Acosta, yeah, there's no one who's staked claim as a backup 6. He's shown that he can do the job. He can hit a really good set piece, and people trash him all the time, but I have no issue with Kellen Acosta. I've always kind of liked the kid, and he's like, you want to talk about 2-footed? That kid can hit a left-footed pass like it's his dominant foot. There's a lot to like there. So, other than harping on the rolled on, there's definitely a lot to like here.
All right, well, let's move forward to the forward position. The wingers are pretty, I think, expected, especially now that Aronson was listed as a midfielder. You had Jordan Morris from Seattle Sounders, Christian Pulisic from Chelsea, Gio Reyna from Borussia Dortmund, and Tim Weah from Lille. Again, I think those are pretty straightforward. I think it was pretty well, not speculated, but reported that Paul Arriola seemed to have been injured of some sort. And that is basically why Jordan Morris is on this roster. Otherwise, it probably would have been Arriola. Those wingers have been playing for the U.S. I think we can talk about Jordan Morris being a little bit of a, I don't want to say surprise, but definitely the weakest link of the attacking 7 that we've brought. But he does have a history of scoring goals for the U.S. men's national team. And to me, that does mean something, especially in big moments. But Thomas, you look at the wingers, the depth, we're at least 2 deep, right? At both left and right sided winger. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, the depth's fine. I mean, Morris would not have been my preferred option there. I think, I mean, it's kind of a lack of options. I don't know.
Yeah, that's fair.
I think at that point you're starting to get to a lack of options, especially if you're moving Aronson to the midfield position, which I mean that's on paper. I mean, obviously if he's needed he can play, but yeah, I mean Arriola. For me, the only glaring difference is I do like his defense. You could bring him in late, and I think Arriola, he's going to run all over that field, and defensively he's going to be able to play that. His offensive game, I've never been overly impressed when you start getting against better quality opponents. Morris, but you're right, Morris has scored some big goals for the United States in friendlies and even competitive matches. So I think he's got that pedigree for that. So if he's needed, I think he can come off and hopefully do something. But his injuries that he's had with his knees, his left and right, that's where it is. His speed's not there, and so that's kind of where I get a little concerned with that consistency from Morris. So,
Caleb, how do you feel about these wingers?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of strength. You want to talk about star power? You look at Christian Pulisic, Gio Reyna. That's where we're at. People want to get in their feels about Reyna being listed as a winger versus a midfielder. Like Thomas just said, it's on paper.
He plays winger for Dortmund. I think people need to
plays winger for Dortmund all the time. Yeah,
he's very good there. He plays on the
Chill out.
left-sided.
You could
That's the
play
problem.
Gio Reyna anywhere on the field, and he's going to be fine. Calm down. It's like I said, Thomas just said it. It's on paper. If you want to play him in the midfield, play him in the midfield. You want to play Aronson as a winger, play him as a winger. Who cares? So again, there's a lot to like. Jordan Morris, you know, we're talking about Morris versus Roldan. At least Morris has contributions to his name. He's had big moments.
Yeah.
We talk about the El Salvador game coming in late with the equalizer. It's a big moment. It's World Cup qualifying. So I have less of a problem with that. You know, if you're bringing in guys from the MLS and people want to get all upset simply because of where someone's playing, I don't care where anybody plays. Like, I don't mind Walker Zimmerman. Walker Zimmerman has shown that he can be a decent center back. I don't care where you play. Jordan Morris is from Seattle Sounders. Christian Roldan's from Seattle Sounders. I have an issue with Roldan because there's no contributions. Morris at least has something, like I said.
Morris with 49 caps, 11 goals. He's obviously a very seasoned USMNT veteran. And for me, I kind of have always likened him to more of a Landon Donovan type player where obviously he's very talented. He might not be fit for what the European game wanted from him. Obviously, though, I think he did very well at Swansea. And it sucks that he couldn't stay over there because I think he could have shown a lot of people that he was up for it, you know. Obviously, Seattle's very near and dear to his heart because it's the connection he has with his dad being the team doctor and everything. So, like, Morris has at least a history, a track record of being good when we need him to be good. It sucks that his injuries have kind of slowed his game down and limited what he can and can't do. But let's look at the strikers, the three strikers that Gregg called in. I think we all kind of knew there were going to be three strikers. I think a lot of people maybe wanted Gregg to call up a fourth striker. But he brought three strikers who kind of have all three different profiles. You have Jesus Ferreira from FC Dallas, Josh Sargent at Norwich City, and Haji Wright from Antalyaspor in Turkey. Now, obviously, that's the surprise, right, Caleb? Haji Wright was not on anyone's real radar because of the way that Gregg kind of talked about him over the summer after that friendly in June. He'd been scoring in Turkey, but it wasn't like, it just seemed like he wasn't on our radar. So how is he on this World Cup roster?
Well, yeah, I mean, when you look at what Berhalter likes to do, he plays his people, right? His guys, they're going to get minutes. And Haji never seemed to get an opportunity. I like the kid. I like what he offers. I think the players like him. There's a history with him when you go back to the youth national teams. I think he fits really well, and he got hot at the right time. Why he got in over Pepe is, I think, the biggest question. Um, Pepe's seemed to be playing really well for Groningen. Um, Conflicting reports saying Pepe's camp's mad, and then some reports saying there might be some injury type situation there. I don't know. As far as the entire group, for me, Josh Sargent's the starter. I've been a Josh Sargent guy, even in his dip in form. People want to ignore context and put his poor form on him only, not wanting to understand that when you're a striker playing for a really poor team, which Norwich was poor in the Premiership, they're better in the Championship, and his form goes with that. Who'd have thought? But I'm sure Ferreira's going to get the start. He's been Berhalter's guy the whole time. You thought Pepe was Berhalter's guy, but I don't know. There's a lot of question marks with this one, a lot of head scratchers with this roster. I still don't know if it's fully settled for me yet, that I've fully grasped, like, these are the guys. I know there can be some changes made up until, Thomas, I'm sure you know the exact date. You're always usually the stat guy, but I want to say the 14th, maybe.
Yeah, correct. The final roster is official to FIFA on the 14th at 1 p.m., I think.
Yeah. So I don't think there's going to be any changes, but there's possibilities. Yeah, It is. It is what it is. I have no issue with Haji Wright.
I think for me, it's interesting that Ricardo Pepi made a move to a team where he could play into a league that fit his level better and clearly was performing at that level and for that team. Now, the team is not very good. That's fine. He's still been scoring. And it just is, it's curious that a guy like Haji Wright gets called up. And it's not even trying to disparage Haji Wright. Like, it's just what Gregg has told us doesn't really align with what this final roster decision was. But Thomas, I think what we're talking about is Haji is unlikely to start. Is that a fair assessment of this trio of strikers?
Yeah, I think Haji, he would be I mean, obviously if everyone remaining healthy, I think he's off the bench sub, needed, if needing a tying or winning goal, in late in the match. I mean, he's 6'3", he's very agile for being that tall. I mean, we've seen some amazing goals from him. So I think he offers a lot from that perspective, as opposed to, Ferreira, who's like 5'9", and Sargent thinks 6'1", or in that range there.
Sargent's like 6'1", 6'2". He's tall
sneaky.
too.
He's sneaky tall. And I'll echo Caleb. I love Sargent. I think he should start. I mean, he got a bum rap, and I think if you actually watch him play, he's everywhere. I absolutely love him. I think he actually fits the system better than Ferreira, honestly.
God, yeah, like that's the question, right? Like the system is the system that we played throughout qualifying still failed to produce a whole lot of goal scoring opportunities, and I'm just like, do you think that Sargent gives us the better opportunity to make better goal scoring opportunities throughout?
They've got to deliver. They've got to deliver the ball to no matter who's there. I think that's been part of the problem too. Is that delivery? I mean, Ferrara's had some opportunities that he's missed, some clear ones. So I think that's part of it. You've got to finish those when you do, because in the World Cup you're not going to get a lot of those chances. You got to make hay with sunshines and get those opportunities in the back of the net. So I think that's part of it. And we've seen Sargent do that, at multiple levels. And obviously, with him going back to striker this season, I think we've seen, really what he can do for the team. But I did look, and Wright only got called into that June camp, the double camp there in June this year. So for champion, for Nations League. So that's the only camp he got called into for the national team. So, and then that's a probably pretty decent look. It's a 2-week camp.
Yeah, it was that was a long camp. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was 4 matches. So
it is. Curious that Pepi was not called up for this World Cup. Obviously, he played such a big role in qualifying. His form dipped a lot, obviously, but I really thought that he had kind of recaptured it. But that said, I do feel that it has to be Josh Sargent as your starter. I think he gives you the most complete player because he does a lot of the things that Ferreira does, that Gregg likes that Ferreira does, right? He can pass the ball with his back to goal. He can drop into midfield, turn, and also still find a pass, but he still can actually get into the box at a better efficiency than Ferreira does. That's just kind of his more natural tendency. So I agree that Ferreira is the backup. I agree that Haji Wright is your third choice. So that's how I would play it. But Berhalter does love his boys. Are there any other snubs that we haven't pointed out yet? Anyone that you can think of that's like, man, I can't believe this guy didn't get called in? Thomas, anyone that's kind of that we're missing?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think really when it come down to it, I mean, I had, when I was trying to decide, who I wanted, who Gregg was going to choose, I had about, consistently 20 players. There was that last, 6 players that you just, where are they going to fit in? I mean, you have your preferences along the way. So I think that's, where I get a little cloudy for me to do that. But I think that's it. I mean, I think the snubs, were clear. I think Stefan, Pepi, and I guess you can throw Cannon in that a little bit. I'm not, I think Cannon's ability to play multiple positions was kind of intriguing, but obviously Gregg didn't think so because he brought another, four right backs essentially that, can play right and left back. Most of them can kind of switch as needed. So, which is still kind of an odd move in my opinion. I think, in my opinion, I would have brought an extra center back. over 4.
I think that's a good point of why Reggie would have been a better fourth right back, because now you're looking at 2 guys in Scally and Dest who can play both right and left, and you would have added Cannon who can play right back and that right center back / just pure right back or center back role. He's done that with Boavista. Maybe Gregg just doesn't think he's as good. I don't know, but that is curious that like we have 4 guys at the right side, 3 of whom can play on the left. But do you really need 3 guys who can switch? I don't know. Caleb, any snubs that you specifically think that need to be recognized other than Georgi Mihailovic, obviously?
Yeah, I mean, Georgie, we've said it for I don't know how many times. Like, it's ridiculous that he wasn't involved more. I think Pflock, you gotta
Yeah.
talk about him. He had a little dip lately, but a guy who can score goals. I think there's just a really bad taste with what would have been the winner probably against Mexico when Gio basically just picked the ball up and placed it on a platter, and
Mm,
Pflock sent it wide for almost a throw in somehow from 4 yards in front of the goal. Still don't know how it's missed. I think that one for Gregg just kind of, I think that was the final deal for him. Um, but other than that, like Thomas said, I think we all had the same, probably 20-ish players, and then 5 or 6 they're gonna be Gregg's guys. We
I
all have
mean,
our own preferences.
every coach has that. I think we need to recognize that. But do we want to highlight some of the positives that Gregg achieved with the building this roster? I mean, is there something that you're like, wow, that was actually pretty smart from Gregg Berhalter, Thomas? I mean, anything that like you thought was a good move?
I mean, it's some of the players are just straightforward, no brainers. I mean, I think the fact he didn't have while he had some snubs, we didn't have any like holy cow, like I can't believe this person's left off at this point.
Yeah.
Obviously, Brooks is that, but he's not. He hasn't been in the picture for a long time, so
Yeah.
that was just inevitable. It was going to happen, but I think he's put a good squad together. I mean, really, like Joe Scally. I mean, I think I think he's played great, and I think Gregg maybe had a hard time bringing in a 19-year-old to the World Cup that had kind of come in late into the cycle. And
Yeah.
I think you saw a little bit of that in his selections, of a Scally and a Moore a little bit, that were just kind of like, at the end, inclusions in some ways. Like Moore was kind of in and out when he finally got into the group, and he's kind of been out for a while. And so I really think he put some good thought in some of the positions, and I think he was a little short-sighted in others. And you look at like Aaron Long. I mean, I thought Matt Miazga was a better player in
He was.
MLS
He
this season
absolutely was.
Than Aaron Long was. But again, he's not a Gregg guy. Even Miazga came out and said, he and Gregg didn't see eye to eye on some stuff, and so I'm very curious to see what that is, because he supposedly said it's going to come out, but it's things like that. It's buying into it, and that's the thing. We've got to buy into this team. We've got to support this team, because this is it. I mean, if there's an injury, they can replace it 24 hours before their first World Cup match, and so that's the other piece to that. Replacing a player on the roster is that piece of it, and so and that's it. I mean, we've got to do that. I apparently, and I don't really buy it, but I was told that I had asked the question of someone about whether or not the U.S. would bring a couple extra players to Qatar to in case of injury during training. Now, mind you, training is very short, but if something happens, you'd like to have that player right available, to come in. Obviously, once they're gone, they're gone. I mean, some of those players could probably quickly get there, but I mean, I think you kind of want to have maybe something waiting in the wings if needed. From that perspective, it's anything's possible, but I was told that's probably not likely to happen. But there are a few players on here that are recovering from injury, so it's a little short-sighted to maybe not include to include them.
Yeah, that's a good point of just bringing those extra players as like training camp players, because teams do that a lot. Bring 1 or 2 guys that they feel comfortable with, and backups to backups at that point. Caleb, anything from the squad that you feel like needs to be highlighted as a positive? I mean, the way he built it, or anything like that.
I mean, as far as the construction of the roster, there were, like we've talked about, there were several that were just no-brainers. It's hard to mess that up. And if he left like a Gajio Reyna off or something like, yeah, let's light the world on fire. He's not going to do that. You know what I mean? Like, there are certain players that just pick themselves. The rest of them, it's kind of, like we said, it's personal preference. We can argue about it all we want. Um, like, I mean, I'm frustrated with some of the picks, but I'll get over it. And once the players hit the field, you know, we're all we're going to lose our minds, right? We're not going to worry about the
Right.
26th man. Once a goal goes in, um, we're going to feel that energy, and it's the U.S. regardless of who's on the roster. I do say, and I've said this before, I say we got to give him credit for some of the players that he's been able to get. A Yunus Musa on this roster is massive,
Yeah.
massive player for who we are, the way we want to play, the way Greg wants to play, a Sergino Dest, making sure that he gets these guys to commit their future to the United States. That's massive. It's not specifically this roster, it's his tenure, but they are on this roster because of what he's done. And I think that's got to be pointed out. I think we got to give credit where it's due. We're going to sit here and pick him apart for every little thing he does. So we also got to give him credit when he does something right. So
My big positive from this is that he did bring in a striker who's a plan B type of option, right? I think Haji Wright is the way that we want to play isn't working, or oh crap, we just got to get a goal, so we need to throw someone on. So I think we all would have thought that PFOC would be that guy, but I think Haji Wright does fill that role, and I think that was smart of Greg to not be so married to his style of play that he understands that he needs someone who can be a little bit different, and that you can play long to, play direct to, with the ability to actually play off of him from a little bit more direct play. Um, let's start looking at this roster again as a whole. This is the question that I think a lot of people have kind of talked about. Um, it's a question that a lot of people have asked, but I don't know if it's appropriate to ask now, but let's do it. Do you think this is a golden generation of U.S. soccer? / should we even call this generation a golden generation? Thomas, you're a historian on this topic. I mean, you've got so much data and perspective on the U.S. men's national team. The first question is this a golden generation?
Yeah, I would. I want to say no, because, but I think this group has more than any other group had before it in terms of you know the federation behind them and that sort of thing. I mean, if you look at like the 90s US team, there was some really good talent on that team, but they were kind of just put together, you know what I mean? They didn't have any real, they put together, they brought some players in so they could compete in 94 on home soil. So I think while there's some great players here, I think there's a higher ceiling for the federation in terms of even some of the players we see. I mean, it's a very good group of young talent, and I was just looking to see. I actually thought that the squad was going to be younger average age. It's like since 1950.
Marine messing it up, man.
Yeah, the average age for the squad is like 20, 25, over 25, and so that's like the 42nd oldest, youngest squad, I guess, since 1950. And so I was expecting to be in the 24s, and obviously the squad that qualified was much younger in many instances. So so I'm going to say no right now. I think I'd want to see. I want to see what the next cycle offers for this group, and how many of these players continue, to be part of the next World Cup. And then at that point, I think we can maybe revisit that conversation, because I think at that point you'll have a better handle in terms of that next tier of players coming in for the cycle.
Caleb, golden generation.
I mean, I think it's a term people like to talk about, but when you talk about golden generation, I think it's got to be something that you talk about in the past. Like if you look at like a Spain and them winning in 2010, maybe that kind of roster, that squad, whatever. Maybe you consider them the golden generation for Spain. This generation here, it's the present and it's the future. I don't think you can say anything because you have no clue what's happening.
Yeah.
Um, that's kind of how I look at it. Is it extremely talented? God, yeah. It's exciting to watch. Weekends are fantastic if you're a US fan right now. We're watching more soccer, better soccer than we've watched in a really, really long time. If ever, I mean, it can't be compared. The clubs that our guys are playing at it's we've never seen it at this level. So it's phenomenal. But until we can look back on this, I don't know if we can call it anything yet. It's just this is US soccer, and I'm here for it. Let's see what happens.
So I don't think I can call this necessarily a golden generation yet for all those things that you all have mentioned. Is we just don't know. It's hard to put that moniker on a team before they even go into the tournament, and when you do, there's a lot of pressure that's added. I do think this is the best, the most talented team we've been able to field top to bottom, right? Especially now with 26. But like the first man on the roster is the last man who is chosen. I think they're much more talented. The floor is so much higher than what we've had before. I'm going to call this the Iron Team, and I'm calling it that from the Iron Age, right? The Iron Age was known as kind of this thing that built the way for like much more evolved and civilized societies and all these. It was such an integral part of creating world history at that turn of the millennia that I feel like this is the generation that sets the stage for future generations to become a golden generation, right? Like this is the first group of guys that we're looking at. Like all of them, it's like, wow, you're playing at this club, you're playing at this club. And so I think this is the first, I'm hoping it's the first of many generations that continue to just get better and better. Because Thomas, to your point, yeah, there were so many really good players on the 90, the 94, the 98 team. But they didn't have the opportunity to go play in Europe the way that these guys have. And part of that is because, there are guys who did break that mold. But it's no longer a little trickle, right? The dam is broken. People understand that there's talent to be found here in the American soccer landscape. And I'm hoping that these guys truly show it, that builds builds things for the future generations. That's what I'm hoping for. So I don't know. Golden generation feels very. I feel like we need to be retroactive by using that term, not forward thinking. All right, so the last question here, on a scale of 1 to 7, Thomas, how confident are you in this team right now?
It's going to be about goals. They've got to score goals, and I'm not confident there right now. I'm really not. I mean, they do a lot well, but they can't be chasing it. They've the way they have been. And the last two friendlies, I don't think they showed well at all. And I think there's a player frustration with that. I'm hoping Gregg is realized maybe he needs to simplify the game plan so they can go out there and be a little bit more mobile and a little bit more creative as opposed to playing from the back like he is. I just don't think that's gonna be a recipe for success for them. So I think that's gonna I think I'll go in the middle on that because I think it could go either way. With that in general, I think it's a group where they can get out, but they're gonna need a little luck, and they're gonna need to be able to kind of do what they do collectively. Because you look at a player like Tyler Adams, how great is he playing for Leeds right now? You know what I mean? And we don't see that. We see him playing well for the US. We don't see it that level. You know what I mean? And granted, it's a different system and all those other things, but like you're missing that opportunity, for that type of performance when you put everything in a box like Gregg has, where he's so rigid in terms of like his inflexibility to change or do anything. So I'm gonna have to go in the middle on that. I'm hopefully optimistic that they do well, but it's it's nerve wracking. I've watched every World Cup since '94, so it's they're all it's always nerve wracking. So these games are so intense.
Caleb, what's your confidence level right now?
I'm gonna pull a Gregg Berhalter here, and I'm gonna split it into 2 tournaments. My confidence level of getting out of the group is fairly high, because I look at a Wales and I look at Iran, um, and I'm not super afraid. I think the reality of getting 3 points versus both of those clubs or sides is very realistic. It's very doable. Um, Confidence level beyond that, uh, not that high, and I think Thomas nailed it. Scoring goals has been it's been a thorn in our side. We talked about it in our last pod. It's been more of like just hope for the best, for individual talent to make up for lack of tactical um uh, basically Greg's system, right? Berhalter ball, as it will. It's not doing what Gregg has promised that it would do. It's not doing what we hope it would do. Um, we're scoring goals. If you look back against all the um, easy teams, you could say maybe those were system goals. But if you look against difficult opponents, I think we're scoring goals based on individual talent. Um, and thank God we have a ton of it up top. We got some incredible talent up top. And I think that's providing those goals. Um, it's harder to do it versus harder teams, better international sides in a tournament that matters a lot more than any tournament there's going to be. So it's going to be even tougher to find those opportunities. So I don't know. Maybe now I've just talked myself out of being confident for the group stage. I'm. It's. I don't know. It's a young team. I'm excited. I mean, like I'm pumped out of my mind. I can't even explain that. Um, I don't know if I want to put expectations on it. We're going to. That's what we do as fans. But I just hope we don't go out there and embarrass ourselves like we did with the last 2 friendlies leading up to the World Cup. I'm just gonna be completely honest. As long as we don't do that, as long as we are competitive, I'll be fine. But if we show up and we play like we did versus Japan and Saudi Arabia, that is an embarrassment for our country and our players.
Yeah, I think that is the concern, right? We didn't have a great showing the last time we saw this team. And so that kind of dips my confidence. Because I'm fairly confident in a lot of parts of this team. Like I do think that this team is going to be competitive in the most part because I've seen them be competitive for the most part throughout qualifying. Um, I'm going to give them a 4 in my confidence rating right now because it's hard to shake what we saw in September. And it's also hard to shake the fact that we didn't really perform well on the road in qualifying. And sometimes this team doesn't really handle adversity the way that they should. Or things not going according to plan the way they should, maybe is the better way to phrase that. And so, I'm concerned of what happens when we have to go off script a little bit. But hopefully we have the talent that figures out how to do that well. But yeah, I'm going with a solid 4. All right, guys. I appreciate you all breaking down this roster with me. Again, the 26 players who are going to represent us at the 2022 FIFA World Cup have been selected by Gregg Berhalter. We've just talked about all of them. Thomas, let us know where you can find your work.
Yeah, so US Keeper is where I can be found on Twitter. I'm actually been doing a little bit of writing.
You have been.
I don't know if it's any good, but and I'm certainly not a writer, but I've got reached out a few times and from Marcus O'Malley chasing the cup, and I've got maybe three pieces on there. I've got a couple other things I'm thinking about. Some of it I don't know. I'm not great at it, but check it out. What some of the jersey stuff on there. Did a couple things with looking at teams in Europe. I did one on MLS playoffs changing. So yeah, check it out. Give me a follow. I love. I mean, I've got the stats. I'm adding to them all the time. So it's I don't know. It's a labor of love for me. So
Your perspective and knowledge are very appreciated.
well, thank you.
Caleb, where can we find you?
USMNT Corner. It's where I'm most active, and then personal is J Caleb Cook 1. A little less active on there, more bourbon and coffee takes on there, but
that might be very important during this World Cup.
I wasn't gonna say
bourbon and coffee might be important for multiple reasons.
It's gonna be very important, and there's gonna be some crossover between both handles there,
yes.
for sure.
Well, again, guys, thanks for joining me. Thanks everyone for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to Soccer Down Here so you get all the content we're going to be putting out during the World Cup. Follow the show on Twitter at SoccerForUsPod. And if you want to support the show, go to buymeacoffee.com/SoccerForUsPod. I'm Bart. I'm out.